All right, today we're jumping into one of the most radical, out-there architectural movements of the 20th century, Japanese Metabolism. Now, this deep dive was curated by Professor Laura Hernandez Arce for her contemporary architecture class at IM Eastie, so let's get right into it. So I want you to picture Japan in the 1950s. The war has left its cities in ruins, millions of people are homeless, and the entire nation is trying to figure out how to rebuild not just its buildings, but its whole identity. I mean, this isn't just an architectural problem, right? It's an existential one.
So what was the answer? A group of young, brilliant architects came up with an idea that was, well, completely backwards from what you'd expect. Instead of building for permanence, for things to last forever, they proposed an architecture of impermanence. Buildings designed to grow, to evolve, and to renew themselves, almost like a living thing.
And they called their movement metabolism, or Shinshin Taisha in Japanese. The name really says it all. It's a term from biology, obviously. But in Japan, it also connects to these deeper ideas of impermanence from Buddhism and cyclical renewal from Shinto traditions. The core idea was this: you create a permanent megastructure, kind of like the trunk of a tree, that can support all these smaller, replaceable cells or capsules, like leaves that grow and then fall away.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the post-war situation that really lit the fire for this movement. Then, we're going to dive into three key innovations. These things called pneumatic structures, capsule architecture, and their absolutely massive urban proposals. And we'll wrap up by tackling the big question. Was metabolism a total failure, or was it a vision that was just way ahead of its time?
To really get metabolism, I mean really get it, you have to understand the crisis it came out of. These weren't just some abstract ideas dreamed up in a classroom. They were a direct, almost desperate response to the reality of post-war Japan.
I mean, the country was facing just total devastation. Cities like Hiroshima were basically wiped off the map. Millions of people needed homes, like yesterday. And beyond all the physical destruction, there was this deep-seated need to forge a new, modern Japanese identity. And then you throw in the constant threat of earthquakes and tsunamis, you can see why the old idea of rigid, permanent buildings suddenly seemed totally obsolete. They needed something resilient, something that could adapt.
So how did they pull it off? Well, one of their first really big innovations was pneumatic structures. The metabolists were obsessed with technology that could replace permanence. And seriously, what's less permanent than a building that's literally made of air?
And the perfect example is this: the Fuji Group Pavilion from the 1970 World Expo in Osaka. Just look at this thing. It looks like a giant, futuristic caterpillar, and it's not held up by steel beams or concrete. It's held up by air. This was just a stunning piece of lightweight, temporary pop-up architecture.
Okay, let's look at the tech. The entire structure was just 16 massive, inflatable tubes made of PVC fabric, and because of this design, the inside was this huge open space with no columns at all. And, true to that metabolist ideal, it was designed to be temporary, built just for the expo, and then taken down.
So here's why that really matters. This pavilion made the whole metabolism metaphor literal. It had to be constantly pumped with air to stay standing. It actually breathed. If you cut the power, the whole building would just collapse. And that brings up this really deep question that we're still dealing with today. What's the relationship between a building and the energy it needs just to exist?
Okay, so let's move from buildings made of air to probably the most famous metabolist idea of them all: capsule architecture. This gets right to the core of their entire philosophy, this separation of what's permanent from what's replaceable.
The concept is pretty simple, but it's also revolutionary. You've got this fixed, permanent megastructure, usually a concrete core with elevators, plumbing, electricity, all that stuff. Then you plug in individual factory-built living units, or capsules. The idea was, as your life changes or as technology gets better, you could just unplug your old capsule and plug in a new one, all without tearing down the whole building.
And right here, you can see the idea evolving. On the left is Kiyonori Kikitake's own home, the Sky House, from 1958. It was basically a living laboratory where he could add and remove rooms, like for his kids, as his family grew. Then, on the right, you see that same idea blown up to city scale with Kisho Kurokawa's iconic Nakajin Capsule Tower. So the Nakajin Tower had 140 of these prefabricated capsules, each one a tiny, self-contained apartment. They were attached to the main core with just 4 bolts, designed to be super easy to remove. The plan was to replace them all every 25 years, but the tower, well, it ended up having a very different fate.
And this is the great irony, maybe the tragedy of the Nakajin Tower. The technology worked, the vision was clear, but because of all kinds of economic, social, and legal issues, not a single capsule was ever replaced. The system that was designed for constant change was completely frozen in time,
and that ultimately led to it falling apart and being demolished in 2022.
But that failure to adapt at the building level, it didn't stop the metabolists. In fact, they just scaled up their ambitions way up. They figured that to solve Japan's problems, they couldn't just redesign buildings, they had to redesign the entire city.
You gotta remember, most of Japan is mountains. Flat, building land is incredibly rare and expensive. The coastlines are vulnerable, so the metabolists looked up to the sky, and even more dramatically, they looked out to the sea for new places to build. They started proposing these city-scale megastructures that would operate like dynamic, living systems.
Take a look at this. This is Kenzo Tongji's absolutely audacious plan for Tokyo from 1960. Instead of letting the city just sprawl out of control, he proposed building a massive, linear city straight across Tokyo Bay. It was structured like an organism, with a central transportation spine and neighborhoods branching off like vertebrae.
The scale here is just staggering. We're talking an 80-kilometer-long city, built on the water, designed to be earthquake-proof, and to house 10 million people. This was the ultimate metabolist vision, a permanent, huge piece of infrastructure designed to support a constantly changing population. Of course, like most of these grand visions, it was never built.
And the ideas just got even more wild. This is Kiyonori Kikutake's Marine City, a proposal for entire cities that would just float on the ocean. You'd have residential towers built on these huge platforms, anchored to the seabed. But the core idea was always the same. If there's no land, well, let's create new land. Let's make the city itself a dynamic, adaptable system.
So after seeing all these unbuilt plans and watching their most famous building get torn down, you have to ask, right? Was metabolism a failure? Was it all just a collection of cool-looking but impossible utopian drawings?
Well, it's not that simple. You can see both sides. I mean, on the failure side, yeah, their biggest urban plans were totally utopian, and the replacement technology at the heart of their whole philosophy never actually got used. But on the success side, they completely changed how we think about cities, not as static things, but as living, breathing systems. Their influence spread all over the world, and honestly, their ideas about floating cities and modular housing feel more relevant today than ever.
The architectural historian Kenneth Frampton really nailed it. He called metabolism the last gasp of the heroic phase of modern architecture. And that's not an insult. It was about this incredible heroic optimism, the belief that architecture and technology could actually solve society's biggest problems on a massive scale.
And that brings us right back to the Nakajin Tower, and it leaves us with this one big final question to think about. The architecture was designed for change. The tech was there, but the social and economic systems around it, they weren't. It poses a fascinating challenge. An adaptable building is pretty useless without an adaptable society, and that's a question that architects and really all of us are still trying to figure out.